Coming to you from the shores of gorgeous Lake Michigan, this is home to passionate book lovers, hosting more than 270 acclaimed authors in 14 years, including best-selling novelists Geraldine Brooks, Ann Patchett, and Mitch Albom. We are live at Lars Hogstad Auditorium in downtown Traverse City, Michigan. Welcome to the National Writer Series. Tonight, a conversation with international best-selling author Jodi Picoult and her new novel, By Any Other Name, with guest host Rochelle Riley, also a published writer and the director of Arts and Culture because he wasn't the type of person that you got to know. The National Writer Series couldn't do this without our amazing audience, dedicated volunteers, and talented authors.
I love NWS!
We are also raising writers with Battle of the Books and free writing classes to 3rd through 12th grade students across the region.
Thank you, NWS!
Tonight's event is supported by the Diana Mylock Historical Fiction Author Conversations, also Debbie Edson and Babe Books. A special thanks to our media partners, Interlochen Public Radio and the Traverse City Record Eagle. Also, we'd like to thank our sustaining sponsor, the Green Brick Foundation, Northgard Technology, Northwest Michigan Arts and Culture Network, West Shore Bank, Traverse City Tourism, and Cherry Capital Airport. And now, NWS co-founder and #1 New York Times bestselling author Doug Stanton and NWS co-founder and executive director Ann Stanton will introduce tonight's event.
Hello, Traverse City! Hello, readers. My name is Doug Stanton. Welcome to this glorious venue. You're in a treat tonight with Rochelle Riley, one of our favorite conversationalists, in conversation with the one and only Jodi Picoult, who's on her book tour, and it is a big book tour. We're so lucky to have her. Her book came out at #1 in the New York Times list in its first week. And she's here tonight to talk about that novel, which you probably have in your lap, called By Any Other Name, which is about an issue dear to her, which is about the prejudice women have faced, women authors, as they go about and ply their craft and their trade. For each of Jodi's events, she has invited a librarian to talk to the audiences about another issue very dear to our hearts, and I hope yours as well. And I'd like to bring out now Larry P. Neal. He is the director of the Clinton Macomb Public Library and an associate professor of the University of Michigan's School of Information, which is where librarians go to get smarter than us. And he was awarded the Librarian of the Year Award in 2013. Please welcome Larry to the stage.
I'd like to thank Jodi Picoult and Ann and Doug and the National Writer Series for the opportunity to share a brief message and call to action about the censorship crisis confronting our nation's schools and public libraries. The freedom to access and receive information is a founding principle in the First Amendment of the Constitution. Since its adoption into the Bill of Rights 233 years ago, courts and judges have upheld this right time and again. Over the centuries, censors and those who have sought to repress the freedom of expression and the right to explore a marketplace of ideas have always ended up on the wrong side of history. Yet sadly, today the censors are back, and this time America's libraries and librarians are in the crosshairs. This time, censorship is not just about one parent complaining about a book a child has checked out that's inappropriate. This time, it's about a well-funded, coordinated national campaign carried out by so-called joyful warriors to gain political power and to cancel the stories of people of color and those who are LGBTQ+. The statistics are concerning. Last year alone, the American Library Association documented over 1,200 censorship demands, a 65% increase over 2022, and the highest number recorded in 20 years. Shockingly, over 4,000 unique book titles were targeted for removal. Surprised? Just ask Jodi Picoult about her 20 adult romance novels that were removed from the Martin County High School Library in Florida. I know, I don't get to do the happy part of this presentation. My library colleagues around Michigan and the nation are being accused of being sexual predators and purveyors of pornography and obscenity for simply doing their jobs of curating collections of books that reflect the interests and needs of the communities they serve. Some examples: in August, a group tried to defund the Alpena County Library, and when they didn't succeed, they're now trying to remove the library board members. In Lapeer County, the prosecutor threatened to file criminal charges against the library director if an LGBTQ graphic novel wasn't removed from the collection. Even scarier, these small but engaged vocal groups of people who are supposedly fighting for parental rights and who don't want the government to be their child's co-parent are getting laws passed to intimidate and criminalize librarians for purchasing and providing books that don't meet their so-called moral, religious, and anti-woke beliefs. In reality, it feels like they do want to have the government and themselves as the co-parents of other people's children when it comes to selecting books that are appropriate for age, developmental level, or family values. Instead of helping young people become prepared for life, these activists are trying to dumb down what's available in the library. Do they really think that removing a book with a fictional gay character from the school library will protect their child versus what that child can access on a smartphone or hears on the school bus? Further, these people are so ignorant or lazy that it seems they're incapable of considering the context of what they're objecting to. They go on this website for lists of objectionable books that list the page number and the excerpts of the books, of the harmful content. No need to read a single chapter, just cut, paste, and complain. So how can we put an end to this assault on our freedom to read? Please take a minute to visit the website uniteagainstbookbans.org. By signing up, you'll get monthly updates and have access to a wealth of ideas on how to help combat censorship. If an issue develops in your local community, or we have some legislation at the state level, you'll get an alert and be given suggestions on action and how to help. Uniteagainstbookbans.org. We won't spam you or sell your information. And on behalf of libraries and librarians everywhere, thank you for your consideration and your support.
Thank you, Larry, and again, thanks to all of you for coming. We've got about 900 people watching between in-person and live stream. So, yay, Traverse City. And thanks to Golden Fowler for making the stage look so beautiful. I would like to take a moment to say that tonight's event is taking place on lands cherished for generations by the indigenous people who lived here. And we wish to recognize the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians who reside here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Rochelle Riley. She's the Director of Arts and Culture for the City of Detroit, appointed by the mayor himself to create this new important job in the community. Rochelle is also an acclaimed author. She previously worked as a national syndicated columnist for the Free Press, and she's an advocate for improved race relations, literacy, children, and community building. Jodi, as you may know, is a New York Times bestselling author, a #1 at that, and she's the author of 31 novels. Yes, exactly. Including Mad Honey, she co-authored with Jennifer Finley Boylan, Small Great Things, and My Sister's Keeper. She has written 2 young adult novels with her daughter Samantha Van Leer, and she lives in New Hampshire with her husband. Please welcome them both to the National Writers Series stage.
We're live.
We're live.
We're on.
We're so glad to see all of you, and I want to dive right into By Any Other Name. As a writer, when I read a book, I mark brilliance with Post-its, and my books are full of such instances. Your book isn't so marked because I would have had to have put a Post-it on every other page. It's one of the best books I've ever read, and I want you to tell, no, I mean that. I mean it. So I want you to tell the audience briefly what it's about.
Sure. I know you guys got your books like 2 seconds ago, and the fact that you don't know just means you're all slackers here in Michigan. But so, By Any Other Name is it's a book about how women have been written out of history by the men who've been writing history. It is a book about how women's voices have been silenced in the past and are still being silenced today. It follows two different women, one in 1581 named Emilia Bassano. She is a real-life historical figure. She was a female playwright who couldn't get her work in front of the public because she was a female playwright in 1581. So she winds up paying a man for the use of his name, and that man happens to be William Shakespeare. It's also about a woman in 2024 named Melina Green, who is also a female playwright, and she has written a play about her ancestor, Emilia, but she can't get that to Broadway because Broadway is a very male-dominated field. And so she too has to make a decision about whether or not she's going to write herself out of history to see her words on the stage. I think when I get excited about this book, it's because there's a little bit of something for everyone. It is definitely a page-turner. It is historical fiction. It is the spiciest book I've ever written.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
I know, but it's also the timeliest book that I've ever written. And, you know, I think that surprised me. But we are still living in a time when women are fighting for their rights, and when a small group of people, as you just heard, are making decisions about which stories should be told and who gets to tell them. So in many ways, we are living Emilia's life over and over again.
Now, I can tell you, in most interviews, the hosts ask the writer to read a few words, but I'm going to read a passage, which is one of the strongest I've read in American literature. There's a Post-it.
I'm just going to retire after this, you guys.
She was a lord's mistress, a lover, a girl who managed to rise above her station and would be lucky to remain there if she watched her mouth. Men believed that women were meant to exist on the fringes of their lives instead of being the main characters in their own stories. But why would God have given her a voice if it wasn't meant to be used? In public, Emilia played the part of a decorative object. In private, when she felt too full at the seams of her own life, she spilled all that emotion and intelligence and hope onto pages and pages of poetry, fables, and snippets of dialogue. Emilia wrote from the point of view of the bird of prey, delighting in those few moments of freedom before the jesses were pulled. She wrote fairy tales about princesses who climbed down brick towers, rescuing themselves. She wrote female characters who were adored for both their minds and their beauty. She wrote witty banter, with men who were not afraid of a woman who could think for herself. She wrote of what sex must be like when your soul was as invested as your skin. She wrote love poems where sometimes love was fire, sometimes it was rote, and sometimes it was agony. She hid hundreds of pages under her mattress. She did not write happy endings. As any real poet knows, the best tales are the ones that contain a kernel of truth. Damn.
It's actually funny you picked that because I very distinctly remember where I was when I wrote that.
Tell me.
I happened to be doing my other work. I was at a theater festival for kids, and all of a sudden I knew she had to say that. And so I literally sat down at my computer in this weird hotel room, threw open a document, and just wrote all that down in one like blob, just like that. It came out just like that.
That is amazing. That is from the soul. That is literally from the soul. So that leads to my question, because, you know, we're talking 31 examples of excellence, 31 books. Was there any part of this, of Emilia, of Melina, that was true for you as a woman in the beginning?
So, you know, I've been saying this, and I truly mean it. This is the book I was fated to write. I don't think I could have written this as a baby author. I think it took me 31 books to get here. But I write all the time about controversial issues. The difference is I'm rarely living those controversial issues. And yet, what Emilia and Melina face in this book is very personal to me. This is a book about what it means to be a woman who is judged differently than a man. I bet there are lots of people in this audience who know exactly what I'm talking about. And so I really feel like, you know, this still happens to me. People think, oh, you know, you're famous now, people must just love you. Well, I mean, I get on a plane every single day, and my seatmate goes, what do you do? And I say, oh, I'm an author. And they go, oh, you write children's books? And I say, no, and they go, romance. And I say, no, and then they say women's fiction, and I'm like, what even is women's fiction, right? And why can't we just have fiction like everybody else? And, you know, I really do feel like this is the book of my heart. And I also think that one of the reasons that my tour has been so exciting and incredible and filled with amazing audiences is because I tend to write about things that are kind of gripping me by the throat at the moment. And I feel like as a woman in America, we are all at that crossroads. Tonight is a very good night to talk about this, right? So,
Yes.
right. We are, if you are a woman in America, you're standing at a crossroads, and down one road, you're watching all your reproductive rights being stripped away. And down the other road is the potential for the first female president. So which way are we going?
So I'm glad you mentioned that, because you have this uncanny ability to highlight these issues 31 times. So how do you decide which issues you're going to focus on?
It's always the one that's kind of keeping me up at night, you know? And I think they've kind of changed as I've evolved as a human being. If anyone ever teaches Jodi Picoult 101 at college one day, and you start looking at, you know, like the body of my work, my earliest books were about the relationship between a mother and a daughter, because that's really what I knew best. And then I got married, and my books were about marriages, and are they ever 50-50, and things. They're not, by the way, and you know, things like that. And then I had kids, and there's a whole string of what are all the terrifying things that can happen to your child,
Yes.
right? And then my kids like grew up and survived and became like amazing people in society, and I started to like extrapolate and write about the things that again were keeping me up. Things like racism, things like women's reproductive rights, things like the nature of good and evil, things like what it means to be a woman in a world that's still a patriarchy. You know, those are kind of where my head is nowadays.
Now, this is really important for me as a journalist. I have to tell you, I wrote about my daughter for years, and our agreement was I had to stop when she was 18. So when she graduated high school, that was it, no more. But one of your main characters, Emilia Bassano, sounds like an incredible historical figure, and yet many people never heard of her before. So we know you do extensive research, because every book is like that, but this one was research on steroids. So can you talk a little bit about that research?
Yes. So there is a lot of research in this. I should also let the audience know that if you are not a Shakespeare fan, if you've never read Shakespeare, don't you worry, I'm going to hold your hand through this book. You know, you don't need to know anything going into it. If you love Shakespeare, you'll see at a different level, I think. But Emilia herself, everything we know comes from almost one primary source document. It is a journal that was written by a man named Simon Forman. And Simon Forman was a doctor/astrologer who she went to after she had a bunch of miscarriages, and she wanted to have another baby. And he recorded every conversation that he had with her in great detail, and including, for example, how he wanted to sleep with her and she wouldn't sleep with him. And multiple times. And all of this, all of his records are in the Ashmolean Museum. So all of you can go and read them if you want to. So what we know about Emilia is that she came from an Italian family that lived in Bassano del Grappa, Italy. They were remarkable musicians. And Henry VIII came over and heard her relatives playing the recorder and said, oh, we have to take them back. They're going to become the recorder consort to the king. So that's how the Bassanos got to England. And they were also Jewish, and in England they were not allowed to be Jewish, so they hid their faith. When Emilia was 7 years old, her father died, and she was given to a countess to be a ward. Very common back then, but this countess was really special, and she gave Emilia a full classical and legal education. Now that would have been extraordinary even for a noblewoman's daughter, but Emilia was a commoner, so to have her mind sparked like that was incredible. When Emilia was 12 years old, the countess got remarried, and Emilia was kind of like a little bit in limbo. So she wound up living with the countess's brother for a summer. The countess's brother was a man named Peregrine Barty. He was the ambassador to Denmark for Queen Elizabeth. And that summer, he undertook a diplomatic mission where he went to Denmark. He met the King and Queen of Denmark. He met a man named Tycho Brahe, who is an astronomer whose ideas are all over the Shakespearean plays. The very first scene of Hamlet is actually a bunch of people looking at a supernova that Tycho Brahe was the one to find. He also had dinner with Tycho Brahe's relatives, who were named Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. You know, not like Joe and Ted, right? And so Emilia either would have been with this man or he would have come home and told her about this. When Emilia was 13, she was given to the Lord Chamberlain of England to be his mistress. He was 56. Now, he was the guy who was in charge of all theater, all entertainment in England. So every play that was written crossed his desk, and he would censor it for treason. He also knew everyone who was a theater owner, an actor, a playwright. Everyone in the theater world was someone that she would have met with him. She would have gone to opening night, she would have gone to rehearsals, and for 10 years she lived with the Lord Chamberlain, until at age 23 she got pregnant. And at that point, she was married off to her wastrel of a cousin, who took all the money that had been settled on her to keep her comfortable, and he blew through it. So now she's 23 years old, she has a baby, she has a husband she hates, and she has to find a way to support her family. We don't know anything about Emilia for 20 years. And then all of a sudden, she becomes the first female published poet in all of England ever. That is remarkable. You should know her name for that alone. But, you know, writers don't just appear in their 40s, like out of nowhere. And it's my belief that she was writing before that, she just couldn't do it under her own name.
See, that's the story. That is what's amazing. So now I want you to do the same thing and talk about the research into Shakespeare, because the Shakespeare I studied at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill is not the Shakespeare that I learned about in your book.
Yeah. So when we talk about Shakespeare nowadays, we're not talking about Shakespeare the man, we're talking about a myth. But just like there are certain facts that we know about Emilia, there are certain facts that we know about Shakespeare. So here's what we actually know. He was a businessman, he was an actor, and he was a producer. We have proof of all of that. We know that he evaded taxes twice. We know that he had multiple restraining orders taken out against him by colleagues. We know that when there was a famine, he bought all the grain in Stratford, and he jacked up the price so his neighbors had to pay it. Who does he sound like to you guys?
He was a scoundrel.
Yeah. We also know that he never played a musical instrument, but there are more references in the Shakespearean plays to music than any other body of work. He never left the country, but he managed to write about places like Italy and Egypt and Denmark with such detail, things that weren't available in guidebooks at the time, like, for example, the location of the closets in the bedchamber of the Queen of Denmark. We know that he was not educated formally. He didn't go to Cambridge or Oxford. There's even a question about whether he attended grammar school, which is fine. You can be self-taught, right? But when he died, he did not own a single book, not one.
Wow.
There were no libraries. And you had to know a lot to write these plays. So where was he getting all of this information?
We know.
When he died, no other playwrights of the time said anything about his passing, even though he was by far the most recognizable named playwright of the time. And when he died, he wasn't buried in Westminster Abbey's Poets' Corner, although a lot of people you never even heard of made that cut. Here's what we don't actually have any proof of: that Shakespeare wrote a single word attributed to his name. No manuscripts, no handwriting, none of that.
Okay, that's why I was blown away. I told you it was the best book I've ever read. So I want to talk about one of the best things about the book, which is the notes at the end.
Yeah.
Because for journalists and for people who are nerds, looking at literally the list of all the different things that you found, all the different truths, it's like all the nuggets. That's what we go after. So I want you to talk about that as well.
Well, first of all, it is such a joy to talk to a journalist about this because we get to nerd out together about it. But this is actually my favorite thing to talk about. And this is the audio-visual portion of the night. Get ready. So as you heard, Emilia had a really rough life, you know? She definitely went from the upper echelon of society. Nope, keep going back. You got to go back a little. Go back. We'll get there. She went from the upper echelons of society to abject poverty, and she constantly was reinventing herself. And she was very strong about it. She accepted all of that. But I really wanted to give her just a little bit of joy, even fictionally. And something I read that was, again, a primary source, really sparked my interest. When Emilia was late in her life, in her late 50s, her terrible husband finally died, thank God. And he had money that came in from a patent that he had. And she basically was due that money, but her brother-in-law stole it. So she took him to court. And she represented herself in court because she was that smart. And that was just extraordinary. But then at the end of the case, out of nowhere, the Earl of Southampton comes walking in and says, "Hey, I'm not the magistrate here, but if I was, I'd rule in her favor." And I was like, what is this? If you know anything about England or class of society, there is no world in which an earl, a peer of the realm, a very wealthy and well-known one, like the Earl of Southampton, would have walked into some commoner's trial and decided to intervene. It just would not have happened. So I was like, okay, look, did they know each other? And then I thought, okay, when Emilia was at court for 10 years with the Lord Chamberlain, the court was very tiny and incestuous, and everyone knew everyone else. It was pretty likely she did meet the Earl of Southampton. And, you know, he was considered a real hottie for the time, and he was 3 years younger than she was, and she was in a relationship with a 56-year-old, and I thought, all right, Emilia, let's get you some. So I decided to write this love story between the Earl of Southampton and Emilia. And it was always going to be a very tragic love story because there's no way they would ever wind up together because they were of different classes. So I finished the book, write this whole love story into it. When I'm done with the book, I am in England working on a theater project. And I go to the Victoria and Albert Museum because the portrait of Emilia that is believed to be her is a miniature about as big as my fist, and that's it behind me. And it is in the archives of the Victoria and Albert Museum. And I was very lucky because they let me come in and see her. I got very excited. Next slide. That's me getting super excited holding Emilia. But I mean, like, I want you guys to imagine what it's like that I was holding a portrait she would have held after I wrote about her. You know, I mean, that was an amazing feeling. So I'm super excited. Again, next slide. These miniatures were all painted by a man named Nicholas Hilliard, who was a very famous painter. And they're all tiny, and they were all in a box together. And you can kind of see that Hilliard had a style. He usually did this blue background, and he was a very good artist. And the whole time I'm looking at Emilia, my eye keeps getting drawn to the guy on her right. So I asked the archivists about it. And they told me that the black background and the fact that he has his hand like this over his heart, both of those would have been the decision of the man sitting for the portrait. Because back then you would leave clues in your portrait, like a little puzzle for people to know you, and that signified despair of some kind. And it's also painted on the 6 of hearts, the playing card. In cartomancy, which is like Elizabethan tarot, The 6 of Hearts means the soulmate card. It means this is the love of my life that I'm never going to be with. And I said, I asked when it was painted, and they said it was roughly the same year as Emilia's. And then I said, who is this? And the archivist said, well, we don't know. It's an unknown man. And I said, I think I might know who it is. So next slide. I pull, that's him, a better look at him, sorry. And next slide after that, I pull this up on my phone. This is the Earl of Southampton, painted in 1594, 4 years after the little miniature that you just saw. This is an accredited portrait. It was done by the same artist, who is Nicholas Hilliard. It's painted on the 3 of Hearts, which in cartomancy means someone has entered our relationship that is going to break us apart. And in my book, that's the year that I wrote a scene where Emilia is beaten so badly by her husband, she literally has to crawl to Southampton. So I tell all this to the archivists, and they're like, oh, we have to do some research. So I go, I have to do some research. And I go back home, and I find, next slide, I find this portrait. Oh, wow. This is by John de Critz, another artist. It is Southampton, and it was painted the exact same year as that miniature. And you can really see the similarities in the facial structure, in the long curly red hair, even in the collar. So I send this to the archivists, and they send me back a 30-page document where they go through the provenance of the miniatures and how they arrived at the museum. And at the very end of it, they said, we believe that it is very likely that this could be the Earl of Southampton. So next slide. What that means is that for about 250 years, Emilia and Southampton have been nestled in a box, side by side.
Oh, wow.
I did that. You're welcome.
Yeah, you did that. You did that.
It was so cool. I mean, I'm sure you've had things happen like that when you're doing research, but I've never anything that dramatic. It was the coolest moment of my research life.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
That is amazing. So here's a question, because this is for me, because I mentioned to you that I'm a writer by trade, warrior by necessity. I'm working on a novel. You've written 31 books. I've been working on the same novel since 2008. But my God, the dialogue. How many people do you know that you can get the words and the intonations and the phrases from 2 different eras so right? Your contemporary characters are friends of mine or roommates I want. And the past characters, did you contemporize their language a bit to make it easier for readers? Talk a little bit about the words.
Yeah. I will say that the whole Elizabethan part was a choice. It was a writer's choice. First of all, creating that world and making it something that you could see and hear and smell, although you might not want to, that was something that felt like creating a fantasy world, honestly. Like you had to sustain a magic almost. And it was hard to do. The actual if you went into the past and you heard a conversation between Emilia and Southampton, you probably wouldn't be able to understand it. You know, what English sounded like then was very different than what it sounds like now. But I had read a lot of different kinds of historical fiction, and I wanted to sort of be able to play a hybrid. I didn't want it to be so artful that it didn't read real, but I also needed it to be certainly stylized so it didn't sound like 2024. So it was kind of striking a balance in that. And you can kind of see the difference between when Emilia is just talking to somebody and when she's writing something, which is even a slightly more elevated form of the language as well. Yeah.
Yes. So let's talk a little bit about this other amazing woman, Melina Green. She's a young playwright in New York City trying to get her work taken seriously in an industry where women's work and stories aren't valued. Talk about how your musical theater work informed Melina's storyline.
I just learned that Rochelle is also working on a musical, so we're like now sisters. And I have had for the past 10 years the great privilege to work in the theater world. And I don't know about you, but for me, it completely energized all writing. You know, working collaboratively just made me even more excited to get back to my novels. It was a really good experience. And the first show that I was adapting as a librettist was actually from one of my books. It was Between the Lines, which was a fairy tale that I wrote with my daughter, a young adult novel. And when we were trying to get that to Broadway, It was the coming-of-age story of a young girl. And we were told repeatedly the exact same things Melina is told in this book when she tries to sell a play about the coming of age of her ancestor. It's too small. It's too emotional. Nobody wants to see a girl's coming of age story on stage. Mind you, I was told this the same year that 2 boys' coming of age musicals were playing next door to each other. It's really interesting when you think about theater because you may not know this, but 80% of Broadway tickets are bought by women. So where is that disconnect? Because you all want to see, women's stories on stage. Absolutely. Well, the disconnect is in the theater owners, who are almost to a fault all old white men. And what they tend to want to see is their own experience on a stage. And they are literally the last gatekeeper, the ones who make the choice about what goes onto that stage. And because of that, if you come in from Michigan and you want to go see some plays on Broadway, there's this vicious cycle where you think maybe the only stories worth telling are the ones that make it to Broadway. When in reality, what we really all want to see are black stories and brown stories and queer stories and stories about people with disabilities and LGBTQ stories and women's stories. We want there to be a huge range of stories on Broadway, and that isn't happening yet.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
I will say, something I did not realize until I finished the book was that I have actually had to make the decision that Melina and Emilia made. Because when we were writing between the lines, my producer felt that if my name was on the libretto, because I was also the one who wrote the original novel, it would be seen as a vanity project and it wouldn't make it to Broadway. And so I was like, okay, I want it to get as far as it can. So when we opened off-Broadway in 2022, the playbill came out on opening night, and there I was credited with my daughter for writing the novel. But even though I had easily written the whole time with my co-librettist, I was not credited for the libretto. And it wasn't until the show closed that my co-librettist went to his lawyer and said, her name needs to be on this. And now that the show is licensed and playing all over America by different theater groups, when you get the materials, I am listed as a co-librettist.
Good.
And you know what? It feels a lot better, Like, that's kind of the whole point to me of By Any Other Name. No one is saying that the Shakespearean plays aren't remarkable or beautiful or that they don't have the best female characters ever written. All I'm saying is, if we haven't been giving credit where it's due, after 400 years, shouldn't we? Right?
There you go. That's it. So I participate in a national trivia group online every week on Zoom. Yes, we're total nerds. We play Jeopardy and such, and I mentioned that I was prepping for an interview with Jodi Picoult, and the excitement was overwhelming. You have such fans, so when did you know that you were Jodi Picoult?
I still kind of can't believe it, to be honest. There was definitely a point where I realized that my book sales were more than my mom's friends, because I thought just her friends were buying the book. But the truth is that I've worked really, really hard, and I acknowledge that. I have had incredible support. I have a remarkable husband that I would not be able to do this without. Yeah, you should give credit for that, because all writers have someone, right? I mean, all writers have a support system. And honestly, there are times where we get great news, and my husband and I still do this silly little jig in the kitchen, can you believe this is happening? Yeah, it still kind of catches me by surprise that I've had this amazing good fortune and that anyone wants to read what I want to write.
That's amazing.
It's true, it really is.
You're a star.
Yeah, well, usually when people recognize me, I'm also unshowered and, at the grocery store, so yeah.
So what are you reading right now?
So I just started reading a book called The Blue Sisters by Coco Mellors.
Uh-oh.
Oh yeah, is it good?
Too? Okay.
I hope it's good. I just started it. Thank you for the plug there. But I literally just started that book. Yeah.
And what is your favorite book of the past 5 years?
So my daughter actually was just asking me for a reading recommendation, and I gave her this one. The book that really blew me away most in the past 5 years was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Mm-hmm. Right? Every now and then I read a book and I'm just like, oh man, I wish I wrote that. That's one of those books. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, we have some questions from the audience that were submitted in advance.
Okay.
So one of them I asked, so sorry, Lisa, because she wanted to know what your favorite book was. Unless you have a favorite book of all time, because I asked for 5 years.
No, I mean, there was another book that I always go back to as another book that I wish I'd written, and that was The Life of Pi.
Yeah.
Again, for the same reason, right? Like, it's a book about what it means to be a storyteller and the power of fiction. And again, I'm just like, man, why didn't I think of that first? So
There you go. And mine is Betty Smith's A Tree Grows in Brooklyn.
oh, such a good book.
Because
Such a good book.
it was the book that taught me that I could be a writer.
Yeah.
So I
Love
wanted
that.
to do it from then.
Mhm.
So Julie wanted to know, if you weren't Jodi Picoult, what would your dream job be?
So, I mean, I was a teacher before I was a writer.
Yay.
Yeah, we love our teachers out there. I always say that I think I'm still a teacher. I just have a very large classroom now. But I always thought that I'd be a very good pastry chef.
And what would be your best dish?
You know, I like making bread a lot. I do a lot of bread in the winter. We're getting into bread season, which is very exciting. And I really like pies. Pies are my favorite.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm so glad we have a pie
Somebody
lover in
likes
the back.
pies. You know,
Yeah.
I bake pies when I'm having a bad day.
You do?
If it's been a bad day, I come in and bake a pie.
Do you know what I make? If I've had a bad day, I make tortillas.
Oh my God.
So let me tell you why. I call them spite tortillas because when you make tortillas, you know, you have to let it rise a few times and then you pinch off a little bit of dough. It's like, I don't know, 13 grams of dough. And then you have to like do this weird little motion with your hand like this.
you go.
And you can really like, I'm really angry right now. So whenever I'm like really pissed off at something, I make tortillas.
See, I do that with I do that with the berries. I make this pie. It's fruit. It's a fruit pie. So it's lingonberries, which is a Michigan thing.
Okay.
Apples and cherries.
Yeah.
And this in the bowl.
Right,
So,
yes.
Yes.
I know cherries are a big Michigan thing, but let me tell you, pitting cherries, oh, God, I hate that.
We
it's
love
terrible.
cherries in Michigan.
I know you do, I know.
And then Paula wants to know who your literary hero is.
I would have to say my literary hero would probably be my mentor who I studied with at college. I had the great fortune to work with a writer from the Chicago area named Mary Morris. And without her, there is absolutely no question that I would not be sitting up here today.
Wow.
Yeah, and we're still friends, which is actually like super cool.
Oh, see, that is awesome.
Yeah, that is really fun.
awesome. My
Yeah.
80-year-old journalism professor is one of my best friends.
Isn't that cool? Yeah.
the best.
And it's also kind of weird because you move into like a different zone when you're both doing the thing instead of just teacher and
Well,
student.
it's weird. When I was inducted into the Hall of Fame in North Carolina, he was my date.
Oh my
Not
gosh.
like a date,
Yeah, it's just
but-
like, yeah.
but we got
That's
to
so
sit together.
cool.
And I saw him as somebody different for the first time ever.
Right.
So
That's really
okay.
neat.
So this is a different question about your favorite of your 31 books. Which is your favorite? Be careful. We're talking about children.
Wow. So up until this point, what I have always said is Small Great Things. I love that book. That book will always be really important to me because it changed me as a human and made me a better and more aware person. So I will always value that in my life. But when I say to you that this is the book of my heart, that this is the one I was meant to write, it's this one. This one, if you've read all my books and you really want to know who I am, it's this book.
Well, I got to know you through this one.
Oh, thank
This
you.
is literally, like, I said it at the beginning, I don't lie. It's one of the best books I've ever read.
Oh my gosh, that's
Ever.
so kind.
Now, I do have to ask, because as a writer, you know, we need to know these things, and
Yeah.
we cannot stop this interview without, when do you write and how do you write? Because this is, you know, hundreds and hundreds of pages of brilliance here, so how did that happen?
So I tend to write when I can in my office, which is in the attic of our house. It was the last room we finished, you know, and I have a computer up there. I have a long desk. I have all my research and files and stacks of books, and it's a total mess, but I know where everything is. And I write like a business day. I usually get up in the morning and I swim a mile, go up to my desk, and I keep writing until about like 4 or 5, and then I come downstairs and, you know, make dinner. And that's literally what my life is like. It's very boring, you guys, being Jodi Picoult, but you know, that's kind of what I do. And it's a job, but it happens to be a job that I absolutely love.
And
Yeah.
everybody should have a job that is their passion.
Absolutely, because then it doesn't feel like a job.
So I do have to ask, because there was an audience member who asked a question about TikTok, which I think we both avoid, but talk about social media a little bit. Whether you're on it, whether you hate it, what that means for somebody who literally is a global star.
So actually, I do not avoid TikTok.
Good.
I am the oldest person, I think, on TikTok. But social media is really interesting, and as someone who's been in this business for a long time, I do think publishing has undergone what I call like the American idolization of publishing, meaning you can't sit in your ivory tower anymore and write a book. You have to be the commodity. And I do kind of like social media because I like being in touch with my fans. If you write me a letter, I write you back. I do not have an assistant. I do not have a staff. It's just me. So if you've written to me and I wrote you back, it really was me.
Wow.
And I think that's really important, because if someone is kind enough to write and say, I loved your book, I think you should be able to say thank you. That means a lot to me. Social media is really cool because it allows you to filter what you're willing to share with the public, right?
Yeah.
So like, you guys don't need to see what I look like when I get out of the pool and I have like my goggle rings around my eyes. But on the other side, if I'm with my grandkids and I'm having a great day, I might put that up on Instagram for you to see. TikTok I joined because book talk was a big thing. And I was like, I want to see if I can crack this. So I started to work on TikTok with the help of an amazing woman who is the one who stitches together all my films. And what is amazing to me is that on this book tour, people between the ages of 21 and 30 who are like coming to my events keep coming up and saying, I found you on TikTok.
Wow.
And that is cool, because it's a whole new generation coming to my books, and I think that's really neat, actually. Yeah.
Well, I told you I don't lie, so let me go back and say I don't totally avoid TikTok. I'm just not on it the way everybody is.
Yeah.
Like, I look at this thing, My Three Cats, this woman who talks like her cats. I'm sorry, but it's just weird. But how much of your persona is just you being you? Because you walked right in and hugged me and said, "Hey, how much is your team and the people who try to?"
I don't think
make you?
I don't think I put on many airs. I think most people who know me are getting the real me.
They get you.
Yeah. I mean, what I've learned about TikTok is that people love you if you are making fun of yourself, and if you are willing to do that, then people think it's really fun and funny, and it's a cool thing to be able to do, I think.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
awesome. So, of course, the question that everybody always asks you, and I'm not going to be the one to not do it, what are you working on next?
So I'm really excited about this. So the
If you're
truth,
excited,
yeah.
I'm excited. Okay.
The truth is that for the next year, I will not be working on a novel. I will be doing my theater work instead, because it tends to be going in like every other year lumps for me. So I am also the co-librettist of the adaptation of Marcus Zusak's beautiful book, The Book Thief.
Wow.
Right. And it's a gorgeous musical, and it will be premiering in the West End in London in the fall of 2025.
I'm coming.
Come on over, September. The reason it's going to be in the West End is because The Book Thief is about the coming of age of a young girl. So Broadway doesn't want it. I'm not kidding you. So we'll have to come back after we win an Olivier or something. But it's very exciting for us, and it's a beautiful, beautiful show. And we also have another musical that we are developing based on a book and a movie called Austenland, which some people may be familiar with. It's very different from The Book Thief. It is funny and silly and raunchy and about living out all of your Bridgerton dreams, basically. And so I'm going to spend the next year over in the UK doing a lot of that work. But I also will be writing the novel that's going to come out in 2026. And how many of you, well, first of all, 2026 is the 25th anniversary of 9/11. And I've always wanted to write something about that. So how many of you remember the Tumblr blog Post Secret? Anyone remember that? Okay, we got a couple of people here, right? So it was a Tumblr blog, and then it became a website, and then an Instagram handle. Basically, people would mail in postcards that were anonymous, and they would write their deepest, darkest secrets on it. And they would post them online. And the secrets could be anything from, every Friday I take off all my clothes and I wander around naked until Monday when I go to work.
Who was talking to you about me?
it could have been like, my husband doesn't know our third kid isn't his. Anything in between, right? So one day I read this secret post that just stayed with me. And it said, "Everyone who knew me before 9/11 thinks that I'm dead." That's my book.
Oh my God. I just got chills.
Yeah, I love that reaction. It's so good.
Can we wait? I mean, can we just literally wait? Oh my God.
Yeah.
But now, how are you doing the musical and a book like that at the same time?
I don't know about you, but I can very easily write a musical and a book at the same time. What's very hard to do is to write 2 books at the same time. And I have done that. When I was working on Between the Lines with my daughter, I was also writing The Storyteller, which happens to be a book about the Holocaust, and Between the Lines is like this light, fluffy fairy tale, so it was like whiplash every day. Oh, no. But that was hard. But it's such a different writing style, and being collaborative and working with a co-librettist and with a songwriting team, it makes it so that for some reason for me it's very easy to switch between genres.
Well, I can't believe I just asked you that when I'm working on a musical
and
a
a book
novel at the same time.
Right, so you kind of know what it's like, yeah.
So I have one last question before we round it out for our live stream audience and for these amazing people who are in this audience, and they have some surprises to tell you about. What advice would you give to someone who wants to write the way you do?
Don't, actually. I don't think you should emulate the way I write.
Okay.
What I would say to someone who wants to be a writer is figure out what it is that you can't get out of your head and write that. Because I think sometimes there's a tendency for people who want to be writers to try to put success above the art. And so now people are like, I gotta write a dragon fantasy romantasy book because that's what's selling. By the time you write that book, something else is gonna be hot, first of all. But I think that you will write the best book possible if you write the book that you need to write. And readers will flock to that. You won't have to go get them, they're just gonna find you. And I really do believe in that. So that would be the advice I give. I get asked all the time about, what should I read to learn how to be a writer? And is Stephen King's On Writing good? Yes, it's a great book. But what you really need to learn is how you write. And it is different for everybody. And once you have that magic locked down and you know what works for you, then you figure out what is the story that you can't wait to tell. And that's how you write a book.
I'm telling you, that's the best advice ever. And this is weird because my novel is part memoir, but nobody will know which parts are true. Is there a little bit of you in all of your books?
There definitely is a little bit of me in all my books, but I often get asked, do you write, your kids into a book or your husband into a book? And I really don't do that because the characters arrive almost fully formed in my head. And I feel like I'm listening to them. I've long said that the only difference between schizophrenia and writing is a paycheck. Right?
Okay, I'm putting that on a t-shirt.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So basically, I feel like what I do is steal conversations very often. I'm a very bad friend because if you say something that's really interesting, I will give that to a character to say. So that's what people find in my books all the time.
I feel better because I do that.
Yeah, good.
But then
okay.
I go and tell my friends
Well, I don't know. Who knows what you've said tonight, Rochelle, that might wind up in a book.
My God. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. So I do have to ask one last question because, of course, this is, and you've probably already been asked, everything about a book, particularly if it's in a bookstore, if it's on a screen, is about the title. It's about what people take with them when they're going to pick it up. Tell us why By Any Other Name.
So By Any Other Name comes from a quote from Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet is one of the plays that I think Emilia wrote. I do not believe she wrote all of Shakespeare's plays. I think there were multiple authors, and they all kind of worked under the direction of the Earl of Oxford, who, kind of like James Patterson has all these authors now in a stable, very much like that. So Emilia, I think, did write Romeo and Juliet, and the reason I think that is because it is the only Shakespearean play where the age of the heroine is mentioned. It's mentioned 3 times. She is 13 just like Emilia was when she became Hunsdon's mistress, the Lord Chamberlain's mistress. And much is made of the fact that Juliet is only 13 and is about to be married off, and whether or not she's ready to be a wife, younger than she, or mother's maid, happy mother's maid. So that's why I think she wrote that. But there's a beautiful speech by Juliet where she says, "A rose by any other name would smell as sweet. So Romeo would, were he not Romeo called, retain that dear perfection which he owes without that title. Oh, Romeo, doff thy name, and for that name, which is no part of thee, take all myself." Because she's a randy little girl. And what Juliet's really saying is, yeah, he's got the last name of my enemy, but maybe that's not what's important. Maybe it isn't his name that is the true measure of who he is, but what's behind the name. And of course, that is exactly what I'm saying about the plays that we've attributed to William Shakespeare.
Oh my God, you are so good. You are just so good.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jodi Picoult.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Give it up.
Up next is best-selling author Timothy Snyder, featuring his new nonfiction, On Freedom. This event is virtual only. Get tickets at nationalwriterseries.org. Thanks.